So let's. It's crazy. It's like,
Yeah.
truly evil human beings. The Clintons and Trump. I don't want to. The reason I haven't asked you until this long in the interview is because I don't want this to be a political story. Like, I don't want it to be politicized and become a battering ram where people on the left go, it's Trump, and people on the right.
It's bipartisan.
Right.
I mean,
it is bipartisan. Yeah. Right. Evil satanic pedophile cabals are bipartisan, and my audience should know that. Where do you see that the Clintons and the Trumps? How are they enmeshed in this? Are they just kind of functionaries in terms of they run the United States government? How close are they with these people?
All right, neither of them are clean, but in order to really explain the relationships, the relationships of this whole thing, I mean, it takes some time, right? Because the official stories about their involvement are just, in my opinion, very superficial. I guess probably one of the easiest to start with, because the Trump one's more complex because a lot of it precedes 2000. Right, a lot of the closer involvement between Trump and Epstein happened before then, but that's also true for Bill Clinton, right? Because the official story about Bill Clinton and Epstein says that Bill Clinton didn't get involved with Epstein until he wasn't president anymore. This is complete BS, right? So what we know, right? As I mentioned earlier, so like the Clintons had some involvement in this Promise software stuff. I mean, they were kind of in this orbit anyway. Not just through Promise, but also the Iran-Contra stuff, which this Epstein network and the Maxwells and all this stuff were also involved through what was going on in Mena, Arkansas.
Correct.
I mean, involved in Iran-Contra in a huge way. Bill Clinton had a relationship with the CIA with Bill Casey. Bill Barr actually acted as an emissary of Bill Casey to Bill Clinton on several occasions, right? Another reason why he is shady as fuck, right? So anyway, that's how this is all before he even becomes president. But as soon as he becomes president, remember that Epstein and Maxwell officially teamed up in New York in 1991. As soon as he becomes president in 1993, they're attending donor dinners, fancy donor dinners, right? For the Clintons. And not long after that, Jeffrey Epstein, that same year, makes several White House visits, and he meets the deputy chief of staff on several occasions. What they discussed, I don't really know. But in 1995, we do know that Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, right, sends this letter to Bill Clinton that you can find, actually was provided by the Presidential Library of Bill Clinton. It says, basically talks about how she had met Bill Clinton at then Senator Ted Kennedy's house, and she didn't have much time to talk to him and had all these other things she wanted to talk about him. And she said in what she called this brief window of time to talk to the president, her 15 seconds of access, she talked to Bill Clinton about two things: currency stabilization and Jeffrey Epstein. This is in 1995. In 1995, Maria Farmer was decorating, right, and working as this artist in residence for Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. She remembers more than one occasion where everyone was ordered out, but they spent all day preparing for Bill Clinton to come. And Ghislaine Maxwell was running around yelling, "The president's coming!" and all this stuff. And the only people that were allowed to stay was the personal chef of Epstein, who died last month under sudden circumstances and no funeral because of the coronavirus. Right? Everyone's ordered out but the chef and the girls. There's no security detail for Bill Clinton. And he's a sitting president at this time, right? So
very strange.
Right. And this is all before the official, the relationship comes out in the open, and Epstein is involved in the Clinton Foundation. Ghislaine is involved in the Clinton Global Initiative. All of the island visits, the flight logs, and all of that takes place, right?
Right. So what are Hillary and Bill doing right now? I mean, other than sharpening knives, what do you think they're? Do you think they're nervous? Do these people get nervous? Are these elites kind of like, ugh?
Well, I think with the Ghislaine Maxwell arrest, I don't think any of these people are really nervous based on how this is going to play out, because I think it's going to be a very secretive, protracted legal trial that is going to get buried in the insane news cycle in which we now live, which involves coronavirus, civil unrest, protests, major geopolitical tensions. I mean, it's very easy to bury the Epstein story, unlike last year. And like I said, it's very clear to me anyway, they're going to let her post bail, and she's not going to end up in the situation Epstein was in, because Epstein was only there because he was denied bail.
Do you think they're going to let Ghislaine Maxwell the definition of a flight risk post bail?
Yeah, I think
Wow.
but because of the charges she's facing, they are so light, right?
Right.
In contrast to Epstein, right, who last year was denied bail because of the crimes were much more egregious that he was officially charged with, is what I'm talking about.
Right.
So, to deny someone the ability to post bail when they are only charged with enticing minors to travel.
Yeah.
Why did they choose those charges specifically? Why didn't they charge her with statutory rape? Why
Right.
did they, keep it at 94 to 1997, right? Well, actually, I can tell you why. It's because in that period of time, Prince Andrew and Alan Dershowitz were not, and Bill Clinton officially, were not on the orbit yet, right? So they
Right.
don't have to be pulled into this upcoming trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. It focuses on a time when none of them were, officially involved.
Interesting. So there's no chance they get pulled into it.
Yeah.
Right. Now, what about Trump? Is there any chance he's pulled into it in any way?
Well, no, because, based on these charges, no, right? But, Trump and his ex-wife, Ivana, were in the Epstein orbit to a significant degree during that time frame, right? Remember, Maria Farmer, said that she personally witnessed Ivana Trump going out with Ghislaine and recruiting preteen girls in school uniforms to come by Jeffrey Epstein's office and, see if they could be future Victoria's Secret models.
Yeah. It's really crazy. Trump did kick Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago because he was hitting on an underage girl. So we'll give him.
Well, there's a longer history to them, right? Because okay, right. So you have to go back to the 1980s and see what Epstein was doing then, right? So basically what Epstein was doing in this period of time, he was doing a lot of shady financial activity for intelligence and intelligence operatives, but he was also, with Leslie Wexner, doing a lot of money laundering through real estate and a lot of shady real estate deals at Manhattan, right? Of course, that's Trump's whole orbit too, right? And during this period of time in the 1980s, the Epstein, Trump, and this guy named Tom Barrack, who's still pretty close to Trump and head of Colony Capital, were called the Three Musketeers of New York nightlife, because they would go to clubs and get with women together and be seen together so frequently. And they were all in that same age range, more or less,
Right.
and involved in the same shady real estate deals. And
Right.
that's ultimately where a lot of that relationship comes from. Though it's worth pointing out that Maria Farmer did say that in 1995, she saw Donald Trump and he gave her this she found it to be a very disturbing look. And then Jeffrey Epstein said to Trump, "Oh, she's not here for you," implying that there was some other type of girl that he would set Trump up with, right? But this was one occasion, but it was enough to make an impact on her, right? And of course, there is that accusation of this girl who claimed that she had been raped by Trump at this event with Epstein in 1994, I believe it was. So there are these claims going around, but as far as I see it, right, a lot of their relationship was based around this shady real estate stuff that Epstein continued to do well into the late 1990s. Why was there a falling out between Epstein and Trump? Well, a lot of it had to do with this property in Palm Beach that Jeffrey Epstein wanted to buy, ostensibly for this money laundering real estate purpose or some shady real estate deal. He invites Trump to come see the property, and Trump, says, "Oh, they talk about it, whatever." And then Trump ends up stealing that property from Epstein and doing what Epstein wanted to do, and sells it to this really rich Eastern European guy, maybe Russian billionaire or something like that, who never actually lives in the property but pays a bunch of money for it, and then it just gets the house gets demolished, and really shady transaction, basically.
Of course.
But after that, apparently what Epstein tried to do at Mar-a-Lago when he was kicked out had to do with an attempt by Epstein to get back at Trump for what had happened there, and sort of get Trump set up with a minor, or have a minor get caught in some sort of sexual situation at Mar-a-Lago to put pressure on Trump.
So this is just a game they play. This is the way that people are playing this game. Are there other intelligence families that are similar to the Maxwells where you have a lot of different kids? I mean, is this something like you have families of, very successful people in sports, or you have like, are there just intelligence families? Is this a
Well,
thing?
I mean, Bill Barr and Donald Barr are an
Right.
example of that, and
Right.
also I believe Bill Barr's daughter also is involved in in the DOJ as some sort of prosecutor related to drug trafficking, which is interesting considering her father's involvement with the CIA during Iran-Contra, which was also an arms trafficking and drug trafficking scandal.
Right. So it's like a lot of these families, like the Bronfman family, are they? Do you think they have ties? They're a pretty big.
Yeah. I mean, they're part of this whole mega group thing that was co-founded by Charles Bronfman and Leslie Wexner in 1991, and a lot of people. I mean, most of the members of that have ties to the National Crime Syndicate, which is the coming together really of the Italian mafia and the Jewish mob in the early 1920s that got in bed with the CIA during World War II. And the Jewish mob aspect of that got very involved with Israeli intelligence as soon as it was formed after the State of Israel, because like Robert Maxwell, they were involved in sending large amounts of weapons to Zionist paramilitaries that resulted in the creation of the State of Israel. And then after, Mossad and the IDF and all that stuff was created, was involved in sending a lot of weapons or money to finance their operations.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, the ties are very enmeshed. And so, the Jewish mob aspect that was run by mainly Mayor Lansky and all of that stuff during that period of time have deep ties to intelligence and also the political sphere of both countries, right? So like the mega group, for example, Ronald Lauder, a close friend of Trump, is basically single-handedly responsible for Benjamin Netanyahu's first election as Israeli prime minister in 1996, right? So, he has pull there, what I mean? He's also a major donor to US politicians, right? Another guy who's sort of in this mega group orbit is this hedge fund manager named Paul Singer, right? Who's a big donor to Likud. He's also head of the Republican Jewish Coalition, a major donor to neocons like Marco Rubio, and members of the Republican Party that are very, neoconservative and things like that. He's also the guy in 2012 that created this organization called Startup Nation Central, which is a direct part of that 2012 policy in Unit 8200 private companies, tech companies that I was talking about earlier. And it's actually, based in, Paul Singer is an American, right? And he started that organization with the explicit purpose of having U.S. tech jobs transferred over to Israel and also having these Unit 8200 companies acquired by major U.S. tech companies. He officially says it was so that the U.S. would have to be dependent on Israeli companies so that the U.S. could never support the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement, the BDS.
Right. What is the end game of all this tech supremacy, do you think? Is just to kind of strip everyone of all their rights, put everything, about you in some type of bank, whether it's, your health data, your financial data?
Yeah. I think that's a lot of it, but let's remember this is, Israel is essentially just building the infrastructure for that's being used by the U.S. I mean, all of this is happening with the complete blessing of the U.S. government, U.S. intelligence community. That's why you have the former chief information officer for the CIA being on the board alongside an ex-Mossad director of this Israeli cybersecurity company, Sepio Systems. As just one example, right?
Right.
Why are they together? But, I think a really good case study about what are these companies doing? I mean, I can speculate about what the end game is, right? But I think you can, people that are listening can, come to their own conclusions based on what a company like Carbine 911 is doing. Because remember, this is the company that Epstein put $1 million in. It was directed and chaired by Ehud Barak, former head of Israeli military intelligence and former Israeli prime minister, and pedophile and Epstein pal. Right? So what does Carbine 911 do? Well, actually, before I even get there, let's talk about some of the U.S. people that are on their board. They have Michael Chertoff, former head of DHS. They have another former head of DHS, the one that resigned not that long ago, that was Trump, under Trump, Christian Nielsen is also on there. They have the former head of LAPD, and, I'm forgetting the rest of them, but there's several former U.S. Government officials and law enforcement officials that are on the board of this company, right?
Chris D'Elia?
They're also
kidding. Keep going.
No, I don't think he's there. There was also a major, at one point he's not there anymore, a major Trump donor named Elliot Tawil, who's a New York real estate developer. And there's also one of the other major investors in this company is Peter Thiel, head of Palantir, very close to the Trump administration, right? And Palantir is a very Orwellian company who has been practicing predictive policing in New Orleans for several years, right? And has basically been developing, I mean, they basically, in terms of like what the Promise software was capable of doing in terms of data analysis, Palantir does that. And what's very creepy about Palantir is they have a label that you can put on a person, and that label is titled subversive. And you can use that to track their activities, but you label the person of interest subversive, which sounds quite odd, right? But anyway, that's just Palantir. So these are the people essentially behind Carbine. It was co-founded, right, by all these ex-Unit 8200 guys, one of whom recently left the company and now works for Eric Prince. So, you know, a fun group of people at the end of the day.
Like, how even after the publication of the last edition of it before he died, a lot of people think he was assassinated. I don't know. He had a heart attack, I believe.
No, he had a heart attack.
Yeah.
I was interviewing him. There's a 3-hour and 40-minute interview I did with him on JFK, and we were set to do one on RFK, and he had to reschedule because he's actually getting surgery. Like, he had heart problems that whole year.
Yeah.
And instead of doing our interview, when he was legitimately in the hospital, Jim Fetzer and Veterans Today and all those fuckers were acting like he was faking being sick so that they wouldn't have to debate about Sandy Hook. And then he gets out of the hospital and stuff. He does that debate, which is a total cluster fucking waste of time. And then shortly afterward died. So he and I never got to do our RFK interview. And everyone loved the JFK one. We were going to do it on the anniversary. We were going to set up. So like, if Fetzer and them had not wasted his time and pushed him beyond when he needed to be resting and stuff, we could have gotten that one out.
Yeah,
but
I mean, that stuff is just like those. And I noticed looking into
and
him.
then people are like, no kids died. Their first version, though, from Veterans Today, which is Israeli intelligence, was blaming the Mossad for Sandy Hook. And they tried to get me to bite on that. I'm like, there's no evidence of the Mossad doing Sandy Hook and no motive. That's so retarded. And then within about a day and a half, they changed it to the hoax stuff, saying no one died at all or whatever.
Yeah, dude.
And
anyway,
but that
there was a guy in the woods
so fast.
There was a guy in the woods.
There was a father.
Yeah, a guy running through the woods. Anyway, I don't want to.
He was running away from a shooting.
I don't want to say. Why don't I talk about JFK? So
why would a guy be running away from gunfire, Michael?
So right away, though, you know, he talks about how, like, all right, you talk about in Dallas, like, means, motive, opportunity, and how, in fact, you know, this guy was Sam Bloom was the one that was in control of the team. Basically, he overrode Kennedy's advance team. He set the route of the thing to go around Dealey Plaza and whatever. He set the route of the motorcade. He was also connected to a bunch of Jewish businessmen, powerful Jewish businessmen in Dallas, there were a lot of them who had
but
previously.
They always call them Big Oil. They never.
Yeah, they always say Big Oil. They never talk about who they are, and then how there had been this racket of wealthy Jews and some underground people that Jack Ruby was connected to that had been smuggling aircraft parts to Israel.
Jacob Rubenstein,
Jacob Rubenstein. So he got involved. He was always a mob figure, but which mob? You know, the Jewish mob with Meyer Lansky.
The outfit.
And then they had been smuggling aircraft parts out of Dallas to Israel to build airplanes. And so there was a massive Jewish crime syndicate running through Dallas. It was connected to wealthy Jews in Dallas who were also big Democrat donors who were bringing JFK down there supposedly
to
give him a bunch of money.
Plane part started with Hank Greenspun, who was a financier for the Desert Inn and Mo Dalitz, another Jewish mobster, and then the Flamingo, which is so the Desert Inn and Flamingo is where Lansky even killed Bugsy Siegel over losing profits for that. But here comes Hank Greenspun and saved the day, stepped up Mo Dalitz from the Cleveland Mafia in there, and there was some business dealings between Lansky and Jacob Rubenstein, but Jack Ruby or Rubenstein worked for the Chicago outfit and had been moved down to Dallas because the new territory in the South, the big new moneymaker was narcotics. And prior to that had been gambling, prostitution, a little bit of drugs, running the unions, racketeering, protection money, that kind of stuff. And of course, they'd lost over $1 billion of revenue per year. Think about what $1 billion is in 1962, 1963, right? That's 10 times as much because when Castro came to power and kicked Batista out, when Traficante and Lansky were in Cuba when this happened and had to get smuggled out. This is why Hoffa used the Teamsters and a whole bunch of Jewish gangsters to start developing Las Vegas as the new playground, because Cuba was out, Vegas was in. But Dallas is very important, and Louisiana, et cetera, because this is where the heroin, the cocaine, and the other new markets were coming in. And neither New York or Chicago they're fighting over the West, and so Chicago gets Vegas, New York gets LA, but Dallas was sort of a open territory. And Louisiana, Florida syndicate end up with it, and Traficante worked with Lansky and real estate deals and stuff. So I guess you could say New York gets more of it, but Ruby was with the outfit. But really, all these guys, it's not clear cut like, oh, this city versus that. It's not like that. It's more nuanced than that. So that when people like, oh, but he was with Chicago and they had a mob war with New York, I'm like, yeah, but
there's another common denominator between these people, right? There's a different, other than what city what gang they're loyal to in what city. There's another common denominator here, which also reflects the interests of Sam Bloom and the Jewish businessmen in Dallas, and that's Israel. And of course, the issue was, now the thing about all of these conspiracy theories is that whether from 9/11 to JFK, those being the two big ones, and the unsatisfied, it's not just like, because I always thought, I never believed JFK was killed by Oswald as lone gunman, whatever it might be. None of the theories that were put forward by the establishment or the conspiracy people made any sense. And I'm like, why? It's like, okay, so the establishment saying he acted alone. He might have been a radicalized communist. Other people are saying, no, he was actually for the CIA and this whole thing. But then, like, the fact that he was killed by a Jewish gangster, it's like people...
Who they deny is a Jewish gangster, by the way. That's the other thing. And they're like, oh, they didn't know each other, and neither one of them has any history with the mob.
There's a couple of things that hit you right in the head about when you actually think about it for a second, and you feel like an adult, at least I did, for not thinking about this, which is, okay, Oswald killed by a Jewish gangster, and two, also JFK's brother was killed, very soon afterwards in another mysterious assassination, which is something that it's talked about, but the two events being linked are never talked about. So we kind of get that, there's a very good reason to believe that the Israelis were
had a motive to get rid of both of them.
Right.
And who would blame RFK on the anniversary, the first anniversary of the 6-Day War, a Palestinian?
Yeah, they blame a Palestinian. That's the other thing. So it's like, all right, so the fingerprints are already all over this, and it's
Sirhan, he took his 8-shot revolver in front of RFK.
Like 12 times, right?
Shot it 13 times, hitting him 3 times in the back. In front of him.
And now, okay, so now we get like
master of ricochet.
There's a lot of information on
then
all
Eugene
of these.
Caesar shot RFK, and he was hired by John Alessio. There's your answer. So.
Right, but like again, there's a lot of information on all of this, and I want to give the audience that's not up on it a little bit of a understanding of where it's all going. So the basic theory here is that JFK was going to not give Israel what they wanted in terms of their nuclear program. They were doing other things, like they stole uranium from the United States through a Jewish manager of a uranium company.
New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Apollo, Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania, you have a lot of information on that. Like, there's so much stuff here that you could spend your life, as you have, as Ryan has, looking into all this. We only got a few hours, but so we don't need to go down every rabbit hole. But they were wanting. The U.S.
Israel.
Kennedy was
and there were
not,
3 things they'd pissed him off about. Besides, you're talking about the nuclear program in Dimona, which is important because Israel thought this is do or die. We have to get the nuclear bomb or we're out.
Yeah,
and Israel had physically stolen nuclear material from the United States, from Apollo, Pennsylvania. So you can look up the New Mex scandal later, and they had lied to the presidents and said that they were not building nuclear bombs. Lied to the inspectors, but Robert Kennedy's man, John Haig, I believe, went there. He tested the flora and fauna around Dimona, and it had 97% enrichment, and nobody in the world had 97% enrichment other than the U.S. Nautilus program for nuclear submarines. So what was supposed to be for our subs ends up in Israel making nuclear bombs illegally. And Kennedy said, quote, "All they ever do is fucking lie to me." And so he wanted to inspect them for nuclear weapons. That's one thing. Another thing is he supported Palestinian right of return. Oof. Wow. Yeah, that's the demographic time bomb. And that was not going to happen. He's the last person to ever do that. So Palestinian right of return, inspecting Dimona. He also wanted to register the American Zionist Council, which we know is AIPAC, as a foreign agent. So those three things did him in. And then a little extra thing is he supported Algerian independence, and the Israelis did not want another independent Muslim state. But the big one were right of return, the nuclear weapons, and registering their foreign lobby as a foreign agent under FARA, which it should have been.
It's also possible he was J-woke because his dad certainly was. His dad was also an anti-Semite that was on the America First Committee and was like kind of like low-key supporting Hitler, and so you wonder if any wisdom was passed down from father to son. So they probably already had reason not to trust him, and then they knock him off.
Well, they suspected they were selling nuclear secrets to the Soviets, which basically created the entire Cold War.
I mean, the whole Cold War was, as we said, if you will, a Jewish A/B test over whether neoliberalism or communism is the best way to conquer the world. So there's that, and then the RFK thing I know less about because again I've just started the book, my Collins Piper book. I don't know if he gets into that in there, but then RFK is possibly going to become president himself, like riding on the coattails of his brother's assassination.
Oh yeah, he just won the California primary.
Yeah, he was big. He would have won.
Nixon was going to lose again to Kennedy.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean Nixon had anything to do with killing him. That's not the kind of thing.
No.
It's not the kind of thing he would do. But
he was a syndicate president, though.
Old Dickie, Tricky Dick.
The first thing he asked about when he got into office is, "What's our info on Israel's nuclear weapons?"
Really?
That's the first thing he asked about. Yep. There's Patrick Coburn and what's her name, Leslie something. It'll come back to me later. They've written some books about this stuff. And it's like there's a lot of rabbit holes. There's a lot of like interesting caveats to go down and go and this and this and that. But like at the end of the day, the conclusion is the same with many things. It's them. It's always them.
It's also funny how Teddy must have known, like, all right, I'm not gonna fuck with these Jews anymore. Like, forget about it. Like but he was also just a drunk and a degenerate. So it's like the more like of that kind of a lifestyle you have, the less of a straight shooter you are, the easier it is for these people to blackmail and manipulate you. And Teddy was always a ne'er do well and drunkard. He killed that woman by driving her into the swamp and then leaving her and. But he ended up being very good for them in all of his years in the Senate. So he learned the lesson. I don't want to go the way of my brothers. And So Bobby.
Robert, one thing is he could have he would actually discussing reopening an investigation.
Well, he wanted to investigate his brother's death. I mean, and the people would have loved that.
But think about it. He realized that he couldn't do that. I mean, he was already the attorney general when he died.
Yeah.
Like, isn't that enough to do it? He needed the presidency.
Yeah.
Because he kind of knew who was in on it already.
He must have known. He had to have some suspicions. And
Lyndon Johnson was the first Jewish president. His aunt was a founding member of the ZOA, which Kennedy was trying to register as a foreign agent, is Johnson's aunt. And, he was sleeping with Matilda Krim, an Irgun terrorist, agent of Israel, who's also tied to that AFT AIDS drug, $1 trillion medical industry that we were talking about earlier. She was fucking him when the 6-Day War broke out. And I've interviewed with Jeff Gates and people who are in the war room, and the alarms are going off and everything, and they're like, shouldn't we do something? Like go to a bunker or whatever? And the Israelis just kind of casually look at their watch and no. Because they knew they were preemptively hitting the Egyptian Air Force while it was on the ground. And the whole thing it's a lie. And then you get the Liberty. And what's Johnson do? He wants it sunk to the bottom, right? Johnson, we start a war in Vietnam over the Gulf of Tonkin that didn't happen. But the Israelis actually attack our ship and kill our sailors. And we didn't do anything but give them more money.
Yeah, and Robert McNamara famously said, Well, look, we don't need to do anything about this. It would be too embarrassing for everybody. And it's like, wait, what?
Embarrass an ally.
Yeah, we don't need to embarrass an ally over a few sailors or something like that. Something really just shitty like that, like unbelievable, actually.
Arthur Krim is married to Matilda, knows that she's banging the president. He was one of those arranged things anyway, but
yeah,
that's what he was doing at the outbreak of the war. And then they went over to his ranch, but those same people were partying together the day after Kennedy was shot. Well, I actually talked to the man who gave Johnson or his speedboat from Yamaha. Was the fastest speedboat in the world at the time. His my ex-girlfriend's grandfather sold the company on New Year's Eve about 10 years ago. And I got to meet them, got them drunk in the kitchen and talking about Kennedy's and stuff. And like, oh, yeah, out on the boat where no bugs and everything's free. That's where they used to do a lot of meetings and stuff. And these people, it's disgusting all the way to the core. And when people hear like the mafia, I think their image is Italians and like just sort of low level crime, like, you know, hitting up a freaking convenience store for money or something or whatever. Yeah. No, man, that's the real mafia is Wall Street. The real mafia is corporate America. Like it's the Kushners, the Wilfs, the Wertheimers, the Sheldon Adelson, the Soroses, those Jewish billionaires with state connections. That's the real manipulators. And look at these billionaires that just got caught banging Chinese hookers or whatever. Like, why would you, if you're a billionaire, you could legally go get a hooker or whatever, but they're in Florida and they're getting these massages or whatever. So you got to think, what kind of extra thing was involved in that? Were the kids or something? Like, what would you need to do that for her? And when you look into the sex trafficking, I didn't know. You haven't heard about this, like Kraft and stuff. This was down in Florida. This was this year. A billionaires got busted in playing around with prostitutes. And
I did hear about this. Yeah.
You did hear about that, yeah. So, but like, that doesn't make sense, right? If you're a billionaire, right? You have all that money, and that's what you're going to do? You're going to go get a hand job from a Chinese prostitute?